Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com, your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Please reach out to me directly. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for pricing details. Today, we're discussing a rare beauty from 1994, re-released in 94 to celebrate 100 years of the Omega brand. This is the limited edition Renaissance 1894 100th anniversary. It is a 1,894 piece limited series in rose gold that was part of a set released celebrating a century of the Omega nameplate. Now, the company behind Omega actually goes back longer than that, but the Omega name was seized upon in the 1890s and gradually became the name of the company as a whole. This watch, however, recalls the 30 series movements of the 40s and 50s and the case designs and dial designs that they sported. This is very much a vintage watch made new, right down to the new old stock Omega 30mm caliber 269 on the reverse side. So let's talk about the basics. The watch is 36 millimeters in diameter, 10 millimeters thick, and from lug tip to lug tip, 44.8 millimeters with an 18 millimeter spacing between the lugs. The hallmarks remain remarkably crisp. The character lines are sharp. The break between satin and polish couldn't be more distinct, and you could see that everything about this watch is immaculately preserved. A medley of satin and polished rose gold, and a fit that is authentically vintage. The watch is small enough that I could imagine it on a 13.5 centimeter circumference wrist. My wrist, as usual, is 16 centimeters circumference, and it's thin enough to fit underneath a dress cuff. The timepiece includes a substantial Omega factory strap that is actually navy blue with a blue stitch, a little bit of bolstering to give it volume, a sheer cut side, calfskin on the bottom, and it is a brand new Omega factory strap with an Omega pin buckle in matching gold. By the way, I will say the Omega pin buckle, I believe to be a little bit newer than the watch itself. So, disclosure to the best of my ability. Taking a quick look at the watch, you'll appreciate just how intact it is. This is a very old school sort of lug junction where you have vertical satin finish on the lug and then longitudinal satin finish on the case band with a real sharp break between them. A polished bezel that has a narrow vertical section, then a polished conical section. Here we have a vintage style Omega crown, broad in diameter but thin in cross section, and what at first glance appears to be a vintage plexiglass is actually a dramatically cambered sapphire. Now on the dial, I think you can see quite well here the reference to the famous 30 millimeter series, and you can also appreciate that it is in very good but not perfect condition. There are two dots on the dial, minor imperfections. The dial is 99%, but those are present. Everything else looks outstanding. It's an upscale dial with a crosshair center, sunken sub with a concentric pattern, a lovely combination of frosted and linear grained profiles on the metal, and then applique rose gold cabochon, as well as Roman numerals radially arrayed with leaf-style hands, then a polished cannon pinion on which the hands are mounted. Very, very, very impressive, and a sector-style dial combined with a crosshair. Turn it all over, and you can see this is a limited edition. You can see there's individual numbering. And here we have Omega caliber 269. I believe this is a 1960s era late iteration of the 30 millimeter series. You can see it's quite nicely decorated, not to haute horlogerie levels, but as good as you will find on any new old stock vintage movement. You'll appreciate that it is a conventional and chunky manual winder. It has a 45-hour power reserve. It beats away at 18,000 vibrations per hour. It pivots on 17 joules, and it's a lovely match for the tone of the case. You can see this is a wonderful sort of pink on pink, because we've got the gold of the dial, we've got the gold of the case, and then we have lovely rose gold gilding or copper colored gilding across the bridges and plates of this movement. And while it would have been 30 meters water resistant back in the day, as with all vintage watches, I encourage you not to submerge them. I should also say that the tactile pleasure of winding this vintage movement cannot be adequately described. The click is wonderfully chunky and mechanical, and it's a very basic vintage architecture. At 30 millimeters in diameter, it was fairly large for its size, which is one of the reasons why the most advanced iterations were excellent chronometry trials watches, because bigger movements are generally easier to regulate to precision. You can see satination on the wheels, you can see solarization on the ratchet wheel, as well as on the crown wheel. You can appreciate that the click is black polished, as are all the screws. There's actually a quite impressive beveling on the edge of the bridges, and then everything else has a satin finish across the top with a black polished regulator and fine adjustment index. Very, very attractive stuff, as good as it gets. A vintage watch without any of the complications that come with owning vintage. It can be a hornet's nest in the vintage market, and that's certainly the case for watches made in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, but made in the 1990s, this is a wonderful blend of old and new with condition to match. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.